Welcome into the second episode of the ABCFB podcast. My name is Andrew Garrison. I represent the A in the ABCFB acronym. That's Brooks White. He's the B, and the rest is what we're discussing. That's college football, the CFB. We had a great first episode last week, and we're back this week to discuss some more college football here as the offseason creeps ever closer to the actual regular season. Brooks, you and I had a late night last night. We were at Assembly Hall, rather, not Memorial Stadium, for the FISU America Games exhibition matchup between Team USA, which was IU, and Team Canada, represented by a secondary school in Montreal. And I don't know about you, but it's 11:30 a.m. right now. I slept from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. after driving back, and we're ready to go with some college football stuff. And so it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, we were at the same place in Assembly Hall, but walked out probably 11:30, almost close to midnight, and I looked at Memorial Stadium and just could not contain my excitement. We're that close to college football season. Indiana, the defending national champions, just seems like the excitement is building up. And just being back in Bloomington, I was super happy and excited to be there. So really amped up for the next couple of weeks and excited to do this show today.
Yeah, absolutely. The lights were on in the press box in there, and I was like peering from the parking lot trying to find my seats, or our seats, I guess, for the Hoosier Network. But yeah, it's creeping ever closer. We got Big Ten Media Days in a couple of weeks, I think 2 weeks, and then fall camp pretty much right away after that. And I know we'll both be in Bloomington maybe before we need to with class to be there on site for some of those practices and media availabilities. But before that point, last week we talked about our safest and most concerning position groups, and all four of those position groups ended up being on offense. We both felt the best and I guess you could say the worst about position groups on the offense for IU. So makes sense to talk about the defense because obviously we don't just know one side of the ball. Rather than going safest and most concerning position groups on this side, let's just have some overall thoughts. We have four categories. Our favorite position group, I guess you could say the safest. Our individual MVP if we're looking at a specific player. An underrated player, maybe a little bit further down on the depth chart that we saw in spring. And then the greatest weakness overall of the defense. Obviously, it's going to be hard to find weaknesses with this team, with this defense, as we mentioned last week. But they obviously exist, and they obviously could be exposed by some of those teams in the middle of the schedule in October. Ohio State, who we'll talk about later in the show. So we'll start with that. IU's defense, kind of just overviewing that side of the ball. We'll talk about Ohio State. Brooks knows a lot about Ohio State. I know a normal amount about Ohio State. And we'll do a little State of the Buckeyes address, talk about where Ohio State stands at this time as the favorite to win the Big Ten in 2026. And then we'll talk about the new ACC tiebreakers, just because I think they're super interesting and worth discussing a little bit later on as well. That's some news that came out a few days ago as ACC Media Days get underway. But let's start with the defense on IU, the team that we cover for the Hoosier Network. Favorite position group? I'll let you go ahead and start. I think we have different ones, if I remember correctly. And, I'd love to know who you're most looking forward to seeing for IU in terms of potential for success this season.
Yeah, I love the cornerbacks. I think it's a good room. Bryant Haynes as a defensive coordinator, he doesn't leave much room for doubt. Every position group is pretty solid across the board. They lose a lot of guys, but this cornerback room, Jamari Sharp, obviously, he is one of the returners who's going to have to step up. He made that big play, the national championship ceiling play in Miami, and they bring in A.J. Harris. I really, really like A.J. Harris. He was a transfer from Georgia originally, then to Penn State, now Penn State to Bloomington. So those two guys, I think they add a lot of length, and they're very quick. I also like Byron Baldwin Jr. and Jalen Bell, what they can do just as corners, maybe, just in that secondary. They're game wreckers. So Indiana, they have a lot of talent, and when you look at it, what they lost in the NFL draft, what they lost just from graduates from last year's team, they lost a lot, but they still have some very solid players in that on the defense and in that cornerback room. So I really like Jamari Sharp. I think he is the leader who's going to step up. He looks like, just from pictures, he looks like he's bulked up a little bit. And A.J. Harris, when you pair him up alongside him, I mean, it'll make life tough for a lot of wide receivers, especially in that Big Ten schedule.
Absolutely. That's a great pick right there. You could also go defensive line or linebacker and I went linebacker with this one. Defensive line might have the most talent, and if we had, our guy Noah Gurkey, who we cover this team for with the Hoosier Network, loves the defensive line. I think that if he was on the show, he would pick the defensive line. I don't want to speak for him, but just I know that he really likes that group. He really likes those transfer additions on the edge. Lots of talent there. You got the returners with Tyreek Tucker and Mario Landino. But I went linebackers because I like the experience, and you lose Aiden Fisher, and sometimes that's a major blow, and it probably should be a major blow for this team. But it's not, because Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones are more than capable of stepping up. They kind of already have when you look at last season, right? Really nice rotation with those linebackers. And so those two are experienced. They've been with Indiana. They've been with Kurt Cignetti, and they're ready to step up and kind of, refill replace that production from Aiden Fisher. So sometimes, there's a lot of teams. Even on Indiana, if you look on the other side, we could, I think, pretty much at a consensus level, call Aiden Fisher the leader of the defense. Obviously, Fernando Mendoza, leader of the offense. You lose Mendoza and you bring in kind of another slightly unproven, like raw transfer in Josh Hoover, and there's at least some questions about it that at least I raised last week. And there's not that on the defense. You lose Aiden Fisher, and just complete confidence. I'm not worried at all about Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones, one or both or whoever, able to step up in that situation. So I like the experience, and I like the proven success at linebacker for Indiana. It's kind of that connective tissue of the defense, right, between the front and the secondary. I love, just in general in football, I love secondaries the most. I love pass defense the most. It's what I'm most interested in. My favorite aspect of football to study is pass defense and pass coverages. And then my favorite moments in football games are when you have an awesome pass defense, an awesome secondary, and still just the playmaking of a quarterback and a receiver is enough to beat it, and there's just nothing you can do about it. They're just too talented. Those amazing catches are my favorite moments. And the linebackers are obviously a part of that in pass defense in certain moments. So no Fisher, no problem, no worries, in my opinion, with Indiana. Obviously, there might be some level of a drop-off in production, but Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones are two of the most optimal players, two of the most optimal people to have in that situation, replacing, sort of following in the footsteps of Fisher, and I think they're more than capable of stepping up. So I like the linebackers a lot. It's my favorite position group. A little bit of a cop-out because it's also the smallest position group if you just count them as the three, right? There's 4 or 5 defensive linemen, about 5 players in the secondary, and just those 2 linebackers on the starting depth chart, so it's a little bit harder to find weak points, but that was my pick there. I like the secondary a lot, too. I just, in general, am partial to secondary, so that's partially why I avoided picking them, because I know that I have a pass defense bias in a lot of ways. But I like the linebackers quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the linebackers, I think the corners, I obviously picked them as the strongest group, but the linebackers, with it only being 2 guys, in Isaiah Jones and Elijah Hardy, they were both like solid contributors on last year's team. They also played 2 years ago as well. So coming into 3 seasons in a row in Bloomington with Kurt Cignetti, they've been there the entire time. I think that also pays dividends because the linebackers are essentially the quarterback of the defense. They are instructing the other players. They're, manipulating the defense. And I think Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones, those are 2 guys who they might be some of the best linebackers in all of college football. You get them both back and pair it alongside, obviously one of the best defensive coordinators, Broyles Award winner, Bryant Haynes. I mean, those are the type of guys that you need on a defense, especially when you have a big target on your back, being the reigning national champions.
Yeah, they're vessels that kind of connect Bryant Haynes, the defensive coordinator, to the rest of the team. And it's, for Bryant Haynes, I'm sure it's relieving or comforting to know, and on any defense, for any defensive coordinator, to know that you have a leader, typically a linebacker, who kind of is just a microcosm of yourself on the field. There's a better way to word that, but you get the idea, where it's Bryant Haynes' mind on the field, just in a, in this case, a more athletic and actually college football player body. And you have that with both Hardy and Jones, as you did with Fisher last year. So that'll be fascinating for the team, the position group aspect, for the IU defense. Individual MVPs, this is just our chance to say, just straight up, who we think the best player, the most valuable player on the defense is. I get so caught, at least personally, I get so caught up in trying to find niche picks and dark horses all the time, and sometimes I forget to mention who's just truly the best. And I'll let you go first here, because I think you have an interesting name to share.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about him. We spent a couple minutes, but I think Elijah Hardy is the best player on this defense. He's going to be the green dot wearer. I think he's the most important guy on this defense because that green dot is the person who Bryant Haynes is personally talking to, echoing or relaying the plays, and then Elijah Hardy has to echo that across the defense and across the field. He's 5'11", do-it-all linebacker. He's all over the place. Again, he's been here. He's going to be a junior, but he's been in Bloomington, for the past 3 years under Curt Cignetti. So he knows exactly what the expectation is, and I think he's going to take a big step up. He's wearing a new number as well, number 5, so we'll see if that flows into the swag that Elijah Hardy has. But I think he is the best player on this defense, and I think we're going to see it in 2026.
Absolutely. I went with Tyreek Tucker here. I like him a lot. He's a clear leader on the defensive line. I'm part of the reason why I put this in here is just to have a true opportunity to talk about the defensive line, but I also do truly believe he's kind of the individual MVP of this defense. He was a Curt Cignetti at James Madison, and he's a great example of someone that, when Curt Cignetti comes in and he brings in that transfer portal class in year one, one narrative that could have been discussed was that, it's Curt Cignetti and a ton of James Madison players. It's a ton of group of 5 players. Are they going to be able to contend in the Big Ten? But Tyreek Tucker is an example of someone where maybe James Madison just had a power 4 player, and maybe James Madison just had a great talent that went maybe underappreciated in the recruiting cycle, and I think that's what happened with him. He's a leader. He's been with Curt Cignetti forever. He's been, from James Madison to Indiana. He's been a part of those great runs. It was a big deal when he announced that he was coming back, and rather than launching himself into the NFL draft, which he absolutely could have done. So a leadership, there's a leadership piece here with Tyreek Tucker. He's the one who speaks all the time. He's going to be at Big Ten Media Days. Him and Carter Smith are always there. A lot of it's because, they've been in the program and Curt Cignetti kind of trusts them on a podium, I suppose. But in spring, we saw Tyreek Tucker speak. It seems like at every turn and every situation, he's one of the players on the defense that steps up to kind of represent the defense vocally to the public. And he's also just awesome there on the interior defensive line. Plenty of impact there, and it's not. We talked about the great transfers on the edge for Indiana, and it's not just a great edge rushing group. It's obviously a great interior defensive line as well with Mario and Landino, who's also someone that frequently speaks to the media. Tyreek Tucker's awesome, and he's this is I guess his last year, and with James from the time in James Madison to now Indiana. He redshirted in 2022. He played quite a bit in his, redshirt freshman season there at James Madison, then transferred to Indiana. Has been a part of that whole journey. The whole Curt Cignetti journey, Tyreek Tucker has been a part of it. And he's made plenty of much of an impact throughout that entire time, and I'm excited to see him again in this last season, and I'm excited to hear from him quite a bit in this last season as well, as soon as in Chicago in about 2 weeks at Big Ten Media Days.
Yeah, I think Tyreek Tucker and Mario Landino, when you pair those two right next to each other, they're very big guys. Obviously, they're on the D-line, but, compared to other D-linemen, and especially in the Big Ten or in the first 3 weeks, I think we might be able to see some big-time plays from Tyreek Tucker in that defensive line when Indiana can just impose their will on the opponents, get it going, and if they can carry that momentum into Big Ten play, I think Tyreek Tucker, he's one of the best defensive linemen in the country. He is a big guy, and he's a leader. He has an amazing impact on the entire defense and Indiana as a whole. And like you mentioned, Tyreek Tucker, Carter Smith, another reason why they're there is because they could be Indiana's best players, Carter Smith and Tyreek Tucker. That's probably the reason why they are the spokespeople of Indiana football.
And 2 more players that could go very high in the NFL draft as well to kind of continue that IU to first-round draft pick pipeline. Let's go to our underrated players. I have one that I think so here's the truth. I printed out my prep before. I put all my stuff in, and then I printed out immediately. So I can't even see. I don't remember what you answered for all of these, which makes this even more fun and interesting. I imagine mine might be the most niche, though, and I'd love to hear your most underrated player on this Indiana defense that maybe won't play a lot. Maybe we saw them in spring, and maybe that's the most that we'll see of them, this calendar year. But someone that's underrated for the future of the program, or even the central to this team that we're going to see in 2026.
Yeah, I went with Byron Baldwin Jr. We talked a little bit about him. He's just so young. We haven't seen the full Byron Baldwin Jr. effect yet. I think he's going to take that next step up. We saw him a little bit, especially in that college football playoff run. But Byron Baldwin Jr., he showed a lot of flashes of talent. I think he's going to move into that new role in the secondary and on the defense. And he was just flying all over the place when he was on the field. I think now when he takes that next step up, he is going to be the most underrated player on this roster, because I'm going to say on the roster, because I think he just has that natural talent, natural ability. And when he is able to put that on display in Memorial Stadium, I think we'll see that in the fall. And I just think he's, frankly, just a beast. I don't know what you've seen from him or if you agree with me or not, but I think he is a game wrecker in the secondary if he can get his game going, especially early on in the season, and carry that into conference play.
Yeah, you make some strong points, and this is fascinating because I also picked a sophomore player in the secondary who we haven't seen a lot of but are potentially excited about the upside with. I picked Jalen Bell, and so here's the truth. I'm a bit of a hyper fixator, and sometimes I see something once and I just attach to it, and because I have no updated information, right? We saw this team in the spring game, and we haven't really seen this team in person since. And so my memories of the spring game are pretty much my memories of IU football at the moment. And that partially is why I'm so high on Tyreek Tucker, because we saw the defensive line really excel in that game. Also, there were 2 plays from Jalen Bell, who, as you mentioned, when he was on the field, and there were injuries, right? There were some strange rotations. This team wasn't necessarily putting the same players on the field with one another that it will in the actual season when we get to the fall, right? We didn't see A.J. Harris, for example, in the secondary. But Jalen Bell, 2 plays that stood out to me in the spring game. The first was I want to say it was a corner route from Nick Marsh in the end zone, and the ball's in the air, and you're thinking, this is the Josh Hoover to Nick Marsh moment. Like, this is the arrival. And what seemed like an intentional pass interference from Jalen Bell. That obviously isn't the most electric play in the world, but pass interference, flags thrown, there's no touchdown, and, to some degree a heads-up play for a sophomore. And then the other one was just a pass breakup in the red zone, but one that, again, I just thought there was a lot of awareness there, a heads-up play. And it's 2 plays in a spring game that probably mean nothing and probably don't indicate a whole lot, but just they caught my eye, and I've been thinking about them ever since. And I wrote it down in my notes for the spring game. I mentioned it to you and Noah sitting next to me as well. Just something about Jalen Bell. I couldn't get my mind off him, which is probably just representative of the way my brain works. I just, I see one person do one thing well once, and then they're the best player on the team moving forward. But Jalen Bell is someone that I think there's something there. He's only a sophomore. I think that from an IQ perspective, from an awareness perspective, I think that there is something to be said about him. Again, I don't know how much he'll play. I don't know how much he'll get in. Maybe only when Indiana's up big on Howard or in Western Kentucky, some of those teams they play early in the schedule. But either way, I think if he sticks around at Indiana and if he develops and evolves and improves over the course of multiple off seasons, then I think Jalen Bell could be a name to know on this Indiana defense as a sophomore. He's listed on the second unit in the depth chart right now, at least the depth charts we've seen. Not sure what the building thinks of him at the moment, but I think that there's something there. I think there's some real upside. I think there's some real potential, which says a lot about the secondary, because we both just picked true sophomore, players in that secondary that could potentially elevate to starting roles in the next couple of years and even contribute this season. So that's super fascinating. And I think you make a good point about Baldwin, in your eyes, being the most underrated player on the entire team, because we know the offense super well. There's a decent amount of returners, and everyone pays more attention to the offense than the defense, I feel like. And so the defense has some names that are a little bit more diamonds in the rough, which speaks to, as a matter of fact, kind of my greatest weakness with this defense, if we want to just transition right into that. And I'll start here just because it flows well. Depth in certain areas is the primary weakness for the defense, and that's part of what we're discussing. If you look at the depth chart, there's a lot of names that you just don't recognize, and they're not all transfers. It's a lot of players that it's just sort of elevated within the program, which isn't a problem. That's a natural progression of a roster. But in some cases, when you have true stars, say at linebacker with Hardy and Jones, if there are injuries at any point in the defense, I say the defensive line is probably the deepest. I'm not sure if you agree with that, but the linebackers and in the secondary, I wonder a little bit about if disaster were to occur. I think it could really decimate the defense this season in a way it wouldn't necessarily have decimated the defense a year ago. So there's that aspect of football too, and that's something that I think we forget in the offseason is that, even if Indiana was miles better than everybody else, you could just have a disaster season. I mean, you and I, we both live in Indiana. We're familiar with the Indiana Pacers and what's gone on there, right? Like sometimes it doesn't matter if the universe decides that it's your year to suffer, then it can be your year to suffer. And I think the defense is particularly prone to that. That's really kind of like nitpicking at this defense and nitpicking at this team because again, it's really hard to find a weakness in a team that won the national championship with an undefeated season last year and then did a great job in the transfer portal and was only elevating on the recruiting trail, etc. But the depth in certain areas is the greatest weakness for me with this defense, particularly on the back half of the field. And I'm interested to see how that plays out over the course of the season. Also, though, Indiana isn't notorious under Curt Cignetti for just rampant injury, right? It's a team that seems to do well with conditioning and seems to do well with rest and taking care of the players and taking care of the physical bodies there. So we'll see how the season plays out. But that, I guess, depth would be the primary weakness, maybe a little bit too top-heavy in the secondary and the linebacker position. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm being too harsh, or do you think I'm just trying to find a weakness on a team for the purpose of finding a weakness on a team?
No, I 100% agree with you. I think it's hard to find a weakness, like you mentioned, on a team who went 16-0 and did really well in the transfer portal and in the offseason. I think we'll find a real weakness maybe in the first 3 weeks when we see Indiana against lesser opponents, see how they adapt to that, and especially since they're all at home. So we'll see some type of weakness potentially, but like you mentioned, it's all about injuries and depth. And Curt Cignetti has his practice plan that he sticks by of shorter practices and more intentional practices. And obviously that has worked for Curt Cignetti and it's worked for Indiana. I think that also helps the players keep them fresh and try and avoid injuries, especially in practice when you're not going full contact the entire time or for a smaller amount of time. So I think if any position group faces any type of injury, the linebackers, in my opinion, would be the biggest concern just because of how much I like those two guys in Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones. They are, like I said, they could be one of the best linebacker pairings in the entire country. So an injury there, you would have to rely on that depth, which, we'll see if that ever happens. Hopefully that doesn't happen for Indiana, but I think those two guys are game wreckers in their own right. So, and any injury would be detrimental to the defense.
Absolutely. And you said something there that just sparked an idea for me, and this will never happen, but you talked about how there could be some true flaws, some true weaknesses, and it takes me back to last season when there was that long touchdown pass by Illinois, and then after the game, Curt Cignetti mentioned how there were like 7 or 8 or 5 or 6 or whatever number he suggested, several just major breakdowns in the defense in the secondary, and Illinois only exploited one of them, but they could have had 5 or 6 touchdowns on those plays, and that triggered a moment for me where I was thinking, oh my goodness, when Dante Moore is playing Indiana, is this going to happen again? And it is an offense and a quarterback that's more capable of exploiting those weaknesses, going to be able to really run up the score in Indiana. But Indiana covered up those issues, right? They figured it out. They solved the problem over the course of the season. And so it just sparks the idea for me that both seasons, and it's by design, that Indiana canceled its home and home with Virginia. They're based on the way the playoff is and the way strength of schedule is valued and all of that. Cignetti said himself he's more focused on the conference games. The non-conference games are more like tune-ups or cupcakes, if you want to be a little bit harsher, for Indiana than maybe some other teams. But I'd love to see, something like Ohio State, Texas, something like Clemson, LSU, like Indiana versus Georgia in week 1. Any Indiana team under Curt Cignetti, I'd love to see them play a really tough opponent at the very beginning because so many teams have that experience, and it kind of really messes up the season, especially in the 4-team playoff where you just have so much less margin for error, and it's not really your fault. Like you had some kinks to work out, you had some weaknesses to recognize and solve early on. So it's just interesting how scheduling has changed and how scheduling is even different across conferences and across programs. And I wish we had that opportunity. I'm really disappointed about the Indiana Virginia home and home. Every once in a while I remember about it, and I just I also have family that went to Virginia, so I'd love to make that trip. But regardless, that's super interesting to me, and it speaks to the defense as well, and it's relevant to the defense as well because last season those secondary breakdowns were seemingly a real issue early in the season. Maybe Signetti, exaggerated it or blew it up a little bit. He's known to do that as well. We know with the Nick Marsh moment and the gold shoes, there perhaps was some strategy behind trying to motivate the players, but it's interesting. It's a situation with a schedule where Indiana really maximizes its opportunity to ramp up towards success towards the end of the season. And that's just something that hit my brain. And I don't know if I'd think of that again. So I'm glad I had the opportunity to say it. We should move on to a topic that you are particularly well-versed in, is what I was trying to say. I think I can just probably say it. It's a college football podcast. It's not an Indiana podcast. You grew up an Ohio State fan. I'm worse. I grew up a Purdue fan. I got that Purdue bear in the background to, commemorate that time in my life. So you're very familiar with Ohio State, and that's way more relevant than Purdue in this situation because Ohio State is favorites to win the Big Ten this season, and it's not a small gap. At least what I saw out of FanDuel, I believe it's plus 190 for Ohio State, plus 270 for Oregon, and I'm not too into betting, so I don't know if that's like a really large gap or not. But regardless, Ohio State is the favorite, and you probably know a lot about Ohio State. And so for our Big Ten segment, I think we should do a little State of the Buckeyes address. Let's talk about the Buckeyes. Do they deserve to be the favorites? How much of a favorite are they? What's going on with Ohio State as they look to avenge a Big Ten championship loss against Indiana and avenge a college football playoff loss as well and get back to the national championship for what would be the second time in 3 years, which I just realized if that happens, that would certainly be a storyline by the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State, pretty much for the past 20 years, they've been national championship contenders almost year in and year out. I think they got a lot better. Julian Sayin coming back for his second year under center, I think that does a lot for this team. They do lose a lot of guys to the NFL. Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs. So replacing those guys will be difficult, but it's year 2 under Matt Patricia for that defense as well. I think Jalen McClain, the safety, he'll have to step up. Peyton Pierce, the linebacker, he'll have to step up. And on that D-line, Kenyatta Jackson Jr. coming back for his senior year, I think that'll really help the Buckeyes. But offensively, it's also another NFL guy as the new offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, former head coach in the NFL. He is the Ohio State Buckeyes' new offensive coordinator. And when you have, in my opinion, the best player in college football to work with in Jeremiah Smith, I think it makes life a lot easier when you're adjusting to a new program, a new, going from the NFL to college. So obviously an entirely new ball game. So Arthur Smith, he has a lot of tools, especially in that backfield when you have Bo Jackson as the running back. Obviously not the famous Hall of Famer Bo Jackson, but this Bo Jackson going into his second year, he really dominated Michigan last year in the big games, and I think he'll have to make that big jump forward in the backfield. You also bring in Legend Bay, but I want to talk a little bit about the schedule from the Buckeyes. They play week 1 against Ball State at home, but week 2 is that rematch. I don't know if you remember week 1 last year, Ohio State, Texas in Ohio Stadium. Ohio State won 14-7, and what a lot of people call just a defensive battle, but a lot of people had a lot of things to say about Arch Manning and Texas. Texas opens up as the favorites by 1.5 points at home this year. I think that's going to be one of the best games of the college football season. I mean, regardless of however you want to look at it, it's the third time Ohio State and Texas have met in the past 3 years. If you remember that college football playoff game, the semifinal, the Cotton Bowl, when Ohio State beat Texas on their way to the national championship in 2024. But now Ohio State, Julian Sayin, second year, Arch Manning, second year as the starter, so I think that game is going to be exciting. But then when you move into conference play, Ohio State, Illinois, Ohio State, Iowa, Ohio State, Indiana, in my opinion, is the game I'm just the most excited for. Obviously, I said I grew up an Ohio State fan. My entire family's from Columbus, Ohio. My mom went to Ohio State. It's just something that when I grew up, my mom put an Ohio State jersey on, but coming to Indiana, I didn't know what to expect from the football, and I might have just walked into, I might just be one of the luckiest guys ever going and doing sports media. So Ohio State, after Indiana, plays USC on the road, and then they welcome Oregon the next week. So that is a brutal 3-week span for Ohio State, similar to Indiana's 3-week span. But for Ohio State, they start on the road at Indiana and then go on the road at USC, then welcome Oregon at home. So brutal 3-game stretch for the Buckeyes, and obviously end the year against Michigan. But I expect this Ohio State team to be 1 or 2 losses throughout the entire season, just because Ryan Day doesn't seem to drop that many regular season games. I think his struggles have really come in the postseason. So I'm excited to see what the Buckeyes bring to the table, and it's definitely interesting that Vegas has them as the favorites in the conference.
Absolutely. And that you make a good point about the strength of the schedule. I honestly didn't notice that till I looked at it. But according to ESPN FBI, it's the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. It's the 8th toughest schedule in the country. Obviously, that's partially because they go on the road to Texas in the non-conference. I'm glad you mentioned that really tough stretch with Indiana, USC, and Oregon. It's at the same time as Indiana's tough stretch, as you mentioned there. Slightly staggered, but end of October, early November, whereas Indiana's is really just the middle and the end of October. But it's a lot of the same teams, right? Indiana and Ohio State obviously play one another. Ohio State goes to USC, back home for Oregon. Later on in the year, at Nebraska and Michigan. Illinois as well, at Iowa. I mean, I think there's only 2, I'd say 4 games that you could consider like automatic wins where they'll be super heavily favored. Home against Maryland, home against Northwestern, home against Kent State, and home against Ball State. I think are those 4 wins, and you could totally at least expect an upset in every other, or not expect, but you could totally reasonably pick an upset or predict an upset in any other one of those games, regardless of how strong Ohio State is. So it speaks to, I guess, the strength of the Big Ten in some ways, because not every Big Ten schedule really represents that and displays that. But this Ohio State schedule clearly does. And yeah, the Texas game will be awesome. I didn't watch that game last year because I watched the highlights, but I was at Indiana Old Dominion. I was in the studio for WIUX, student radio station. So I was aware of the score. I was aware of what was going on. But for the most part, I was involved with Indiana Old Dominion. I'm sure you were watching Ohio State, Texas. I don't think I know where you were, but I guess that makes sense if you weren't there at Indiana at Memorial Stadium.
Yeah, I watched the entire game, and it was really back and forth in terms of momentum. Obviously, the score 14-7, it doesn't show you a whole lot, but that's when we really found out how good Ohio State's defense was last year. And Ohio State's defense, when you compare them to Indiana's defense last year, obviously we saw in that Big Ten championship game, it was a low-scoring 13-10 win for Indiana. And Ohio State's defense was really, really solid last year. They also had, 3 guys go in the top 12 in the NFL draft this past year. So that just shows the amount of talent on the roster. But they replace them with a lot of great players. Riley Pettijohn, I think, is going to step into that big, solid linebacker role for Ohio State, where they lose Sonny Styles, they lose Arvell Reese. But Riley Pettijohn, an Ohio kid, I think he's going to have to step into that. I mean, fill in those shoes for Ohio State. And I have a lot of confidence in Pettijohn. I think he has the size, but also he's playing under Matt Patricia's defense, which they showed out in Matt Patricia's first year in Columbus. So a lot of guys on that roster, on that defense, who will have to step into new roles. But when you are at Ohio State, that's just the expectation, and that's been the expectation throughout the program's history of you just have to step in and show up. Where, obviously we cover Indiana, and we see a lot of that what goes on in Bloomington. I'm not saying that that's not the expectation in Bloomington, but Indiana's success is a lot more recent. Curt Cignetti is trying to build the program into one of the mainstays in college football, and to do that, he has to look in his own conference at programs with winning history like Ohio State, programs like Michigan for the most part, and even the programs that Curt Cignetti has been around in Alabama. He knows exactly the expectation. Not to bring this back to Indiana, but Ohio State has that blueprint set for the Big Ten schools. And I think in this 2026 season, any school who is able to have a returning quarterback or a quarterback with experience. I think you're sitting pretty here, and especially in the Big Ten Conference with Julian Sayin, Dante Moore. I'll even throw Josh Hoover in there because he has some of the most amount of starts, I believe, or maybe first or second most amount of starts in college football. When you have a quarterback with experience, I think that matters a lot in the Big Ten Conference. Ohio State has that, Oregon has that, and Indiana have that. All obviously the top three favored for the Big Ten Conference.
Absolutely. This Ohio State team will be interesting to watch. Obviously Ryan Day got that national championship. So many coaches at the top level are criticized for not being able to win the big one. And then once, it's almost like a fireable offense if they're not able to win the big one. And then the second they do, they're one of the greatest coaches of all time. And they're, it's a major, major jump. And so Ryan Day's made that jump, and now looking to get back there and do it again. Again, second time in 3 years. We've had so much of a discussion about Indiana. But also Ohio State to win 2 in 3 years would be a super major, storyline. That's something that I'm kind of interested in with the WNBA. This is a bit ridiculous, a bit of a ridiculous tie-in. But you have the Aces and the Lynx. On one hand, the Aces can win 4 titles in 5 years, which is a huge deal. But at the same time this season, the Minnesota Lynx could win 2 titles in 3 years, just like Ohio State. So especially if that's the WNBA Finals, like you have 2 potentially like super significant runs, like dynastic runs running at the same time, specifically if the Lynx win a championship, because then it's 2 of the last 3, while the Aces have won 3 of the last 5 if the Lynx win the championship. That's just something I'm interested in with the WNBA. And it's kind of like that here in the Big Ten as well, where if Indiana and Ohio State kind of alternate at the top, obviously with Oregon and teams like that mixed in, that could be super fun to watch over the course of the next half decade or so. Ohio State also, according to FanDuel, is the favorite to win the national championship. And I was listening to the Andy and Ari on 3 podcast on the way to Bloomington yesterday, and I heard something. I mentioned that because I feel like I have to credit them for this, because I wouldn't have thought of this on my own. But the goal is to win a national championship, obviously, but the true final form of evolution for an elite program is to be universally the best over the course of time, meaning you're favored to win your conference and you're favored to win the national championship before the season. Over the course of the season, maybe you're undefeated, but regardless, you're universally considered the best team, and then you actually win the national championship. So from July to January, you're the best team, and you're the team that's expected to win the national championship, and you actually do it. Ohio State has a chance to do that this year. Really the only team that truly has a chance to do that, because only one team can be the favorite to win the national championship at the top, at least this season, because there's no tie in that category. So Ohio State has the opportunity to really go all the way wire to wire, I suppose, in terms of the perception of who's likely to win the national championship. Really tough schedule, so it'll be interesting to see if they can actually do it. Ohio State at Indiana is a game that is, you mentioned Ohio State and Texas is maybe the best game of the year. I think Ohio State Indiana could be that. I'm sure you're obviously not going to vehemently disagree with that idea, but I forget about it. This is what happens when you're covering football and men's basketball at the same time, is sometimes you think about one more on a given week, sometimes you forget about the other for a little bit, and just little things like that, like, oh, right, Ohio State's going to Indiana this year. I haven't thought about it in like a month. I haven't thought about that game in a while, and now it's just a reminder that that's going to be an unbelievable day or night whenever that game is, probably noon. And
Probably
yeah,
noon.
that'll be a thrill. Yeah, probably noon. You make a good point. That's the other nice thing with Indiana, with us, is now that Indiana's more likely to get big noon kickoff on days, then it's more likely that we're able to watch the primetime games. I'm thrilled about week 1 because best day ever, right? You go to Indiana, North Texas, you write about it, and then you get home, you're on the couch, you're with your friends, you're watching Clemson LSU, I believe it is, or whatever else whatever other primetime games there are that night. So we'll have more opportunities like that rather than 4 o'clock Big Ten Network kickoffs where you really can't truly pay attention to full games anywhere else on the slate. But yeah, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, Ohio State in a good place. We'll be excited to monitor that, and you're in a great place too, as you mentioned, like super lucky. Even just because, for me, it's not even excitement about because covering Indiana, right? Naturally, obviously, I would enjoy going to the Rose Bowl, for example. But also some of those fun matchups. Like 2 years ago, Indiana Notre Dame, whoever was there to cover that for the Hoosier Network and these sports media organizations that we're now involved with, that must have been an awesome environment and a really cool experience. And so matchups like that, Ohio State, Texas is really, really cool. But you kind of get to, you're well-versed in 2 playoff runs in some cases. And it's not like you're a fan like trying to cheer for Indiana. Obviously, we cover that team neutrally. It's just interesting to see you get to watch Indiana, Alabama, and you get to watch, Ohio State, Miami, or whatever it may be. And so some of those major, great, historic blue blood programs in college football I'm not used to actually watching the team I'm covering or the team I'm most involved with play against because, I grew up a Purdue fan, right? Ohio State was pretty much the only one, and that one win in 2018 is pretty much the only memory I have that's positive for being a kid cheering for Purdue. But Ohio State plays those teams all the time, and that's those fun, awesome, major matchups happen all the time. And now Indiana's at that level too. So it'll be interesting to monitor both of those teams. Obviously, I'm exponentially more well versed in Indiana compared to Ohio State at this point. Yours are a little bit more even, but Ohio State's obviously going to be a noteworthy team to discuss over the course of the season by nature of them being the favorites to win the Big Ten and the national championship. One conference that does not have a favorite to win the national championship, no one in the top 6 as far as I can see right now, is the ACC. And it's a conference that almost missed the college football playoff entirely, got Miami in, and then Miami ended up in the national championship game, and there are very many parallel universes where Miami wins that national championship game. If you have an infinite amount of parallel universes, I guess, that's where Miami totally could have done it, and they were very close, and it wasn't absolutely obvious that Indiana was going to win until that Jamari Sharp interception, at least from my perspective. I was watching inside Assembly Hall. You were there in Miami, if I remember correctly. But the ACC, new tiebreaker rules for the conference championship game. We can run through them and kind of explain what's going on here and then discuss, I guess, what we think. But maybe just to start, Brooks, what's your assessment of the ACC? Because you've got Miami. It's a weird situation. They were almost not in the playoff at all, and then they're, I guess, according to the tiebreakers, their 3rd, 4th, or 5th best team, obviously really their best team, ended up in the national championship game and almost winning it. It's a weird situation with all this parity in college football where a Power 4 conference team could almost miss the playoff entirely, but then the member institution that actually got there almost just wins the whole thing. What's the ACC looking like in 2026? There's a lot of new faces. You look at James Franklin. There's a lot of potential contenders in the conference, and we don't know how many are contenders in the nation. What do you think of that group as a whole there on the East Coast?
Well, I would put Miami, like you've mentioned, in their own separate category above the rest of the ACC in terms of talent and actual ability to win the national championship. They bring in the most recruits. They probably have the best roster. They have Darian Mensah coming over from Duke to be their quarterback. I think they have a lot of talent across the board, but also, like you mentioned, they were 6 points shy of winning a national championship in their own home building. So Miami, they're looking to get back, and I think that they are probably the best team in the ACC. Right behind that, it's every man for themselves in terms of, everybody just duking it out for that number 2 spot. I really like SMU in the ACC. I really like, obviously that's crazy to even say SMU in the ACC. Just me, a college football traditionalist. I've been watching college football, 8 a.m. to the West Coast game since I was, 2012, 2013, very young, and SMU being in the ACC, Cal and Stanford being in the ACC is still just so weird to me. But SMU is right there. I really like Georgia Tech, Alberto Mendoza, and obviously Brent Key, what he's been able to do there. There's a lot of just fun teams in the ACC, just not a lot of teams I think could actually make a run in the college football playoff other than Miami. I think Miami's in a league of their own, and if they can get to the ACC championship game, because obviously they didn't last year, I think it's their conference to lose.
Absolutely. Yeah, you make a good point about that conference expansion. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Those little miniature helmets that you can buy when packs with the conferences. I have all of them, at least all of the Power 5. The Power 5 conferences from, 8 years ago. I have them all. And I think my most prized possession that you just reminded me of, that's probably in a box in the attic, is the Pac-12 conference helmets. I have a white one and a silver one. I miss the Pac-12 a great deal. But you make a good point about the ACC. Miami is minus 135 to win the conference, favored against the field to win the conference in the ACC. So certainly it'd be surprising if they weren't able to do it or were able to get to that conference championship game. The ACC conference championship race. Oh, there we go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Well done.
Yeah, I have
do you have
the
them all
entire
too?
Big. The Ohio State one is just the closest to me. I have the entire Big Ten and SEC just on my desk right here. I do have the Pac-12. Just I didn't put the Pac-12 up just because it's dead. So
Yeah.
I don't display the Pac-12, and I actually don't have the ACC. I wish I did have the ACC, but then again, the ACC is just entirely different. It's a new look conference than when I had those. So it's funny that we both collected the mini helmets for sure. I also have all the NFL ones as well.
Yeah, well, I could go maybe while you're talking next. I'll get up and grab it. Is it a stand, and does it have two sides to it? One side is the conference standings, one side's the schedule for the week.
No, I just
Okay.
have all of the helmets.
Okay, I think
Just
I got a set when I
threw
was
them in
5.
a Tupperware box or whatever.
Yeah.
They've just been sitting there for a while, but yeah,
Do
maybe
you
I'll
have
get them
the
out.
do you have the teeny mates? The little they're like pencil toppers, but they don't actually go
Yes,
fit on the
yes,
pencil.
yeah,
Those guys
yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll grab my collect. I can see all of them on my very messy, what's it called, shelf bookcase over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's funny. That's clever. I mean, I used to like, yeah, I put them up. I used to make my own top 25 rankings on this shelf right here, and which was messed up because there was no Notre Dame and there was no UCF at the time. Like you couldn't really make it work. But I did my best with that. I like I like brands. I have a problem with that. I really like just looking at a Michigan State logo on a chrome helmet. Just something about it. But yeah, that's bring back Washington State. Bring back there it is. Yeah, like that. Just for some reason makes me so happy to just be on my desk. Anyway, yeah. But and speaking of, by the way, the teams that you know how it is, like you're just watching college football and sometimes there's teams you have no allegiance to that you just like find yourself partial to in certain situations. It's Pac-12 teams for now, specifically Washington State and Oregon State, that I'm going to watch them at 11 p.m. and I'm going to be thinking about how I want them to win against, Wyoming or whoever they're against in conference games. I guess the Pac-12 is back, so maybe I shouldn't be too down on myself. But yeah, regardless, all this conference expansion doesn't even matter because these Pac-12 teams can't win the ACC anyway this season. Maybe they can. It's going to take a while for me to scroll. Yeah, Cal is the closest. I think they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11th in the odds to win the ACC. But regardless, they have new championship rules, new championship tiebreakers, I should say. And the ACC is just a mess because this speaks to the main point that I'm trying to make. The conferences are obviously too big. Everybody that's a consensus opinion. Everyone knows that. There's 17 teams in the ACC, and they're playing a 9-game conference schedule, which is mathematically impossible. You can't do it. Some of these teams are playing 8 games in conference. Some of these teams are playing 9. And so the first part, which I think kind of prompted the first part of this changing of the tiebreakers, right? Partially because Miami missed the conference championship game and Duke went and won it as a 7-5 team. That was a problem for the ACC because they almost missed the playoff entirely as a result. And also the fact that they're moving to 9 conference games, right? And there's an uneven amount. So the first step in this process is identifying the teams that are tied, which you wouldn't think is something that you'd have to do. But basically what they're saying is if two teams have the same amount of wins or the same amount of losses, then they're tied. So if you're 6-2, you're tied with a 6-3. That's a bad example. If you're 7-2, you're tied with the 7-1 teams, and you're also tied with the 6-2 teams, right? Or could be tied with either one, which makes it really, really strange because it could just be winning percentage, but you're giving those teams that play 8 games the benefit of the doubt to assume that they maybe could have won or maybe could have lost their game if they had a 9th one. But regardless, if you're 7-1 and you're playing, if you're, I don't know exactly what the schedule looks like, but Georgia Tech plays Georgia in the last week a lot, and so maybe if they're 7-1, I don't know if they play 8 games. I'd have to go back and look at the schedule. But if they're 7-1 and they're watching a 6-2 team play, just hoping that they don't win their 9th game to get them up to 7-2 to cause a tie, to cause problems with the championship procedures, that's something that could totally happen. It's probably the best way to do it. Winning percentage maybe is unfair, but also because there's so many teams, the strength of schedule is so different top to bottom across the board. Florida State jumps to mind. I think they play 6 of the top 7 teams in the ACC. NC State plays 6 of the 8 worst teams in the ACC in terms of the preseason odds or expectations. So it's really tricky. And then the most important point is that after head-to-head, instead of going to, strength of schedule within the conference, which is how Duke was able to beat out Miami, you go to the Sports Source resume rankings, the body of work rankings, which is one of the factors that the College Football Playoff Committee uses. And this is fascinating because I have a rankings algorithm that works kind of similar. It ranks the resume straight up, the body of work. We'll have segments on the show where we do our little playoff prediction, not predictions, but current playoff brackets if the season ended that day. And I'm going to use this rankings algorithm, but especially early in the season, Brooks, you're probably going to really thoroughly despise. I think we'll explain it another day, but I like it a lot. And it's interesting because that kind of idea for how you should rank teams is what the ACC is kind of going to use now, in part because, in theory, if you put teams with the best body of work in the playoff, in the conference championship game, that gives them the best opportunity to actually win games in the playoff like Miami did, and avoid the scenario of Duke getting into the playoff or something like that, or no one getting in the playoff, although now the ACC champion, regardless of where they're ranked, is in the playoff. Duke wouldn't have gone to the national championship game, I think we both agree, if they were in the playoff last year. Miami obviously did. They're trying to maximize the opportunity for Miami to do that again, or a team like Miami to do that again, rather than a team like Duke to potentially ruin or spoil the ACC's chances of really making a run happen in the college football playoff. So this is interesting. I think I've gotten through like the general idea of what's happening here. And do you like this, Brooks? Do you think this is terrible? Do you think we're moving away from what conference championships should be? Does it even matter? Are we going to eradicate conference championships anyway in a couple of years? What do you think of these new ACC tiebreakers that prioritize the overall body of work more than just straight up wins and losses in the conference in certain tiebreaker situations?
Well, two things. I think this change is necessary for the ACC. Conference championship games should be reserved for the best teams in the conference, and what happened last year was laughable. 7-5 Duke winning the ACC championship when you had, a consensus top dog in the ACC. Obviously, I know the way that it worked with the tiebreakers and whatnot gave Duke that opportunity, but Miami proved that they should have been there with their entire body of work. They beat Notre Dame in the first game of the year, and they were watching the ACC championship from their couch. It was laughable what happened, and with the ACC, I think they saw it because they almost took Miami, like they gave that chance away almost. If the College Football Playoff Committee chose to look at Notre Dame and their recent run of form, I think it really wouldn't have gone Miami's way because Notre Dame was actually ahead of Miami in the past, or the two college football playoff rankings before the final one. So a lot of people were thinking that Miami was going to be left out of the college football playoff even after beating Notre Dame head-to-head. I think this helps because it maximizes those college football playoff bids for the conference, which obviously brings in a lot of money. I think that's why the ACC wants to do it for another reason. It's not just because they want their teams in. I think it also will help out the conference financially. And I think the other point, I think we're going to start to see with the way college football is moving. I don't think there's a need for conference championship games. I think, honestly, they are ruining, like, the schedule is the biggest problem right now in college football, where these games are going so late into January. The national championship game, I believe it was the 21st, 22nd of January this past year. With the new expanded college football playoff, and they're even talking about expanding it even further, if you're going to do that, the conference championship games don't matter. It's all about seeding, because if you're going to punish these teams for making the conference championship games, then it almost, incentivizes teams to not want to play in the conference championship game at all if their resume is already good enough to make the college football playoff. You saw it the past couple of years where these teams, the College Football Playoff Committee is coming out and saying, we're not going to penalize you for playing in a conference championship game. That to me says, what is the point in the conference championship game if there is no benefit or no real incentive to win the conference championship? Now we're going back to the winner makes it in automatically in the Power Four conferences, which I like that. But these conferences are now having to go back to the drawing board and retool the way their algorithms are working for the tiebreakers. The ACC needed to do that. And now you're seeing, like, the Big Ten has 18 teams in the conference, and only 2 teams make the conference championship rather. There are still they're just multiple bid leagues now. and the ACC is trying to become a multiple bid conference, I don't think they have the talent to do that. So I think this is a necessary change for them because it gives those teams who are at the upper echelon of the conference that opportunity to play in the conference championship game. But I also think that conference championship games should be the next thing phased out of college football.
Okay, I think this is the first time that we're somewhat disagreeing, but I think it's just because we prioritize different things. So here's the deal, right? I understand obviously why they're making this move from a playoff success standpoint, from a financial standpoint, right? The first point of contention for me, above all, is, and I also understand why this happened, but don't expand your conference to 17 teams. We're at the point now where, in order to, the reason why college football playoff as a whole has a selection committee to begin with is because, and this is natural, but 138 is too many teams to realistically have divisions and play have an automatic way to qualify like the NFL where it's based solely on your record because all the strength of schedules are different, right? Obviously, but we're at the point now where the conferences are so big that you have to have kind of a selection committee or something like a BCS rankings to decide who's in your conference championship game because the strength of schedules are so outrageously different. We talked about the difference between Florida State and NC State. So that's the first issue for me. And that's why, you're probably right. This is probably what's necessary. It's just extremely unfortunate that this is the way it is because to me, what I liked about college football, well, one of the things I liked about college football is there were two elements to it, right? There's the straight up record, there's, at least when I was growing up or when we were growing up, 14 teams in the Big Ten, right? My parents romanticize the 10-team Big Ten, but 14 teams in the Big Ten, two divisions, straight up, it's your record. There's some strength of schedule stuff because you're playing different teams in the other division, but for the most part, the Big 12 was my favorite conference as a kid because it's a round robin and straight up the top two by record go to the championship game, you play again, and then you go from there, and a lot of times in that time, the winner of that game would end up in the playoff when you had Oklahoma at the top and things like that. But it definitely is probably the right way to do it. I do, though, 100% think that your conference championships should be, and this is important because these sports source resume rankings seem to include non-conference stuff. So when Miami plays Notre Dame, for example, that matters. And so that win over Notre Dame would, I guess, have launched Miami into, one of the factors that launched Miami into the ACC championship game last year. And I think your conference championship should absolutely be exclusively based on your conference and, in my opinion, exclusively based on your conference record and the head-to-head and the tiebreakers there. I'd rather have, verifiable, even point differential. But it's just impossible because the conference is too big and you're playing different teams. Some of these teams have two common opponents with one another. So it's just unfortunate that it's so big that this is what is necessary, as you mentioned. As far as and also conference championships, the other thing about that, with you mentioned them not really being necessary, is that no one kind of really cares. You were there for Ohio State, Indiana. I was just watching on TV. But either way, it's cool to win a Big Ten championship, and it's from the Indiana perspective, it's cool to beat Ohio State. That's a pretty, a very large statement of validity in that, this team really is there in a big game against the biggest team to win, and then obviously do so still in the playoff. But I think Ohio State was maybe the biggest win of that run because Ohio State was, Miami was the 10 seed, Indiana had already beaten Oregon, and Alabama, the game was such a blowout and such a disaster that it didn't really feel as gratifying, I guess you could say, for Indiana fans, at least the ones that I've been speaking to and have been around. So that Ohio State win was a big deal, but no one cares because no one, if Indiana, Ohio State's a good example. Actually, not a good example. Indiana, if they'd won the Big Ten championship game and then not won the national championship game, no one would look back on, they'd be impressed, they'd be happy with it. This is a terrible example because Indiana has done nothing successful for many, many years. But if Ohio State, a better example, wins the Big Ten championship game and then loses in the national championship game to Miami, for example, if it's flipped, then there's very little appreciation for the Big Ten championship. It's just all thinking about the national championship. Everyone wants to win the big championship, whereas in the past, conference championships mattered a little bit more. The BCS was much more exclusive, or there just was no championship game, and it was all about the conferences. So you make a good point. It's probably unnecessary. I run into this issue with my rankings algorithm every year. I haven't done it in a few years, but I brought it back partially for this podcast and partially just for my own enjoyment. But I always have that issue because yeah, for conference championships, the way it works, it just messes it up to have some teams play 13 games. I agree that there should be no punishment for losing that game. Obviously, I do think it's cool to have a gold star on your resume. It's almost like a tiebreaker for the committee on its own, where if you win your conference, that means something. But also, what does winning the ACC mean compared to winning the Big Ten, right? Like, what does being third in the Big Ten mean compared to winning the ACC? It's really tricky. There's no equality across the board with those conferences, which is okay. It's the way college football is. But it's unfortunate that the conferences are so big that we can't even just say that it's the top two teams with the two best records, because they're not even playing the same teams at all. It's just like college football at large, just a little bit smaller. So I guess I said we disagreed, and then I pretty much didn't disagree with you at all. But the first thing you said that caught my eye was you saying that this was a great move, and it's because the reason why I disagree with that is because I just prioritize. I'm so resume focused and I'm so results focused. I think there should be no power ratings, no predictive metrics in the playoff selection process or any evaluation of deciding which teams should qualify for anything, which is why this is kind of weird to me, and why if the ACC had 10 teams or 12 teams, I would despise this, because I don't think that just because Miami beat Notre Dame out of conference or probably has a better roster or is more likely to go to the playoff, they didn't, under the rules last year, they didn't deserve to be in the ACC championship game because win your conference games, right? Like, obviously it was a tie, but if Miami just wins one more, then everything's fine. There's no issue. But ultimately, the issue is that they're not playing the same teams. The strength of schedules are, significantly different in different for different teams and different programs. And so, I would prefer it if it was just like the NFL in the conference, from a conference perspective, just straight record. 7-1 versus 6-2, even just winning percentage related, 7-1 versus 7-2 if you had to play a different number of conference games, which in itself is a little bit outrageous to me. And it's unfortunate that it can't be that way. So when you first said that, I was thinking, like, get all of this, all these algorithms out of here. Let's just look at the results. Miami's a better team than Duke, but Duke performed better in ACC play than Miami, and that should be all that matters. But it can't be all that matters. As you mentioned, it's necessary to do something like this because Miami's ACC is so much different than Duke's ACC. And Miami's ACC last year is so much different from Miami's ACC this year when you look at the difference in their schedule. And Florida State, NC State, all of those teams. So it's tricky. It's probably the right way to do it. They thought about it way longer than we did, in those important meetings and in those important rooms. But it's unfortunate. And I'm interested to see how my rankings algorithm compares to whatever's going on with the ACC, and that'll be something we can kind of look at when my strictly resume-based rankings algorithm that will explain more, when the season actually starts. It'll be interesting to see who are the top two ACC teams at that point and how they stack up with one another. Maybe Miami just runs away with it this year and it doesn't really matter. And then maybe next year there are no conference championship games and it never presents an issue. I also think it would be funny if after all of this, there's some, Miami drops a game in October and there's just some strange sports source tiebreaker.
They always seem to lose a regular season game. They always seem to just drop a regular season game in conference. So I don't know. I still think that there is a way that Miami doesn't make the ACC championship game. I mean, I think they're the most talented team. Not to cut you off there, sorry, but
no, go for it.
It's Miami, and I mean, I think this is probably a conversation and a topic for another show. But if you are going to make all of these new scenarios, obviously new rules for conference championship games and the way that you figure it out, I think especially if college football playoff expansion is on the horizon, you have to fix the college football schedule. Maybe move it up like week 0 is now week 1 and everybody plays then. You have to fix it because we can't have college football going and ending like the national championship game is in the NFL playoffs. Like, you can't have that. It used to be over like the first week of January, and that was good. And now you're running into all of these problems where, and not to get too sidetracked, but the transfer portal is open during the college football playoff. These coaches who have gotten their teams throughout the entire season, they've won a Big Ten championship with Curt Cignetti and any of these other conference champions, and you have guys on your roster entering the transfer portal, but still saying, hey, I want to practice, I want to be there with the team, but also I'm going to be somewhere else next year. It creates so many problems. Curt Cignetti said it while we were in Atlanta at the press conference, but he's like, right after this, I'm going to go, we have recruits on campus, so I'm going to go visit with them and try and get them to commit. Like, why is that a priority for coaches when you're essentially punishing them for doing well? Something needs to change. It's not just conference championship games, but something needs to change in the college football schedule. I think this is something that we should talk a lot about in another episode. But when you have these conflicting schedules, it creates so many problems for the programs, for the coaches, for even the players if they want to enter the transfer portal. When you have these conference championship games, which is, in my opinion, if you could create a committee who will see that the conference championship games shouldn't matter if we still have this same schedule. If they want to fix the schedule and create a new type of format with the college football playoff, it's something that needs to be addressed, and something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, because it's all out of whack right now. I mean, it's free for all, and it's punishing the teams that do well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it is better now that, at least from the Power 4 perspective, that it's an automatic qualifier for sure. You get in, but again, it doesn't matter because I guess the ACC is maybe a different story, but in the Big Ten, like whoever's in the Big Ten championship game is probably in the playoff anyway. I'm 85% joking. I'm 98% joking with what I'm about to say, but I can predict the future with Miami's season. They're going to lose at Wake Forest. They're going to lose to Virginia Tech. They're going to be 7-2, and then a 6-2 team is going to somehow in the algorithm find a way to get that second spot in the ACC championship game instead of Miami. And even though Miami had a better win percentage and played one more game and played a difficult schedule, and that's going to be what happens. Miami's going to get spurned out of the ACC championship game anyway. I was going to be able to make that point better if they played 8 games, because then I could say that 7-1 Miami that made one mistake in week 3 is going to miss the ACC championship game to a team that has 2 losses. But they have 9 games, so I couldn't make that point quite as well. But we'll see how it plays out. The ACC will be interesting. I'm not going to take it seriously at all with the championship race. It's just because I agree. I don't think anyone else is going to the playoff besides Miami. So let's see if Miami can squander their opportunity to take the ACC's automatic bid, and that'll be the only storyline out of the ACC. As far as the playoff goes, I really like Louisville. I like Virginia. You mentioned different teams even. You mentioned SMU, obviously Virginia Tech too. There's some teams in the ACC I'm excited to see. Georgia Tech, Alberto Mendoza, that's something real as well. And so there's some teams that'll be fun to watch in the ACC, but it's more of a not in the playoff sort of perspective there. There's a better way to word that. But regardless, you make a good point about the schedule. Maybe that can be our national segment, our C block segment next week. And as we get ready for Big Ten Media Days, where we'll certainly have plenty to discuss at that point as well.
And a lot of content with the Big Ten Media Days.
Yeah.
We got you covered for the Hoosier Network, our own personal social medias. Not to jump right in there, but super excited to go to Big Ten Media Days. I think Andrew and I are trying to figure out a way to go to 2 days of them so we could get you covered on Ohio State, Oregon, Purdue, even if you're an Indiana fan and paying attention. And then obviously Thursday when Indiana and Curt Cignetti and the rest of the players go to the podium. So I'm super excited for that. I think it's just another one of the cooler things that we get the opportunity to do as reporters covering Indiana football. But we're just creeping closer and closer to college football season and being back on campus and that buzz that just surrounds college football. So this show is just another one of the things that just makes me that much more excited for college football season.
Yeah, totally. And it's tricky with Big Ten Media Days because that's also Lollapalooza weekend. So hotels are, it's impossible. And we're in central Indiana, so we could realistically do 3-day trips, and I've really been thinking about that. We're definitely going on the 3rd day when Indiana's there, obviously. We're credentialed for all 3 days, though. You got Chicago traffic. We'd be commuting in during rush hour. I'm really thinking about it, though. I know we're doing a day trip on the 3rd day, and I think I think we might be out of luck So I don't know anyone that lives in Chicago that we could stay. Like I'm really trying to figure it out, but I think I might end up just triple day tripping. I don't know if you're going to be there the first day. Maybe we can ride together the second day, but we got to figure it out because
Yeah.
like I keep thinking about it, and that's where my mind keeps going. And I know that's like outrageous. I don't know how much money I'd spend on gas in that situation, but yeah, you're right. It's definitely exciting. That'll definitely be interesting. And you're right. I mean, the Hoosier Network football, we'll have plenty to discuss here from what we see from other teams as well, not just Indiana. Even if we just go for one day, we'll see a third of the conference. If we go for two, we'll see even more. And if we go for three, we'll see all of them, which would be great. That's the best case scenario if we can find a way to make it happen. And yeah, I mean, check out all of our stuff. Our men's basketball stuff too. If you're watching this show, there's a decent chance you're an IU fan, and that means there's a decent chance you obviously are an IU men's basketball fan. You're with the Daily Hoosier, if I'm not mistaken. I'm with CrimsonCast and Assembly Call. We both had coverage last night of that stuff. You can find me with the Andrew Garrison Show. It's my own podcast, Garrison's Gradient, on Substack. Got some college football stuff over there, too. And from Big Ten Media Days as well, I'm sure I'll have some college football stuff, some stuff there as well. I've been doing one college football, really, or men's basketball, but really college football this time in the year, story a week so far. So if you're looking for some more columns, that's where you can find them on Substack, Garrison's Gradients. But yeah, you got anything of your own to plug here, Brooks?
I'm very active on Instagram, so follow that. Brooks White, my name. And then obviously stay tuned for all the content that we will have out for Big Ten Media Days and just going into the college football season. I think Andrew and I are on the same page. We want to get as much content, as much, reporting as we can from Bloomington, just to the people and to the fans. So the Hoosier Network, Brooks White, and then obviously, you got to plug the Twitter, but Brooks White, that's where I'm most active and most I promote a lot of my stuff on Twitter and Instagram. So I'm super excited for the future of this show. So that's another thing that I am very excited about and interested in. So just excited for the future.
Yeah, and you can find all that stuff in the description here too on YouTube or Spotify. Just a list of everywhere else that you can find our stuff. So yeah, that'll be a thrill over the course of the off season, over the course of the actual season as we get to that point. I know I'm moving back into Bloomington really early in August. I'll be probably there as much as possible during fall camp. I don't know if we have that schedule yet with media availabilities and that sort of thing, but I know based on last year, it's pretty frequent that we're able to get in there. So yeah, it'll be fun. And then obviously before we know it, we'll be in classes, and then even more before we know it, we'll be watching North Texas play some football there in week 1 on September 5th.
Taven Jackson comes back to Bloomington.
Yeah, how about that? Great point. I mean, I've realized that probably later than I should have. Like you see the schedule come out, it's like, oh, it's North Texas. Like in a conference championship game last year, great, and then just took me a month to go in and start reading North Texas student writing and Taven Jackson. Our Taven Jackson, that Taven Jackson. Taven Jackson, by the way, who we watched in high school, and
Center
I'm
Grove.
sitting here at the end of this podcast talking about high school still. But Dante Moore and Taven Jackson in the back-to-back weeks for Carmel. Beat Dante Moore, decimated by Center Grove and Taven Jackson. That's
Caden
cool.
Curry.
I forgot about that. What'd you say? Sorry.
Caden Curry too. I mean,
yeah, wow.
He was an absolute beast for Center Grove as well.
Will Helt on that Carmel team, Clemson legend. Purdue legend?
A lot of college football and potentially some of them future NFL talent coming from Central Indiana or obviously in Dante Moore's case, Detroit, Michigan. But it's been a fun episode, Andrew.
Yeah.
And excited for the future of this show, and we'll see you next time.